Well, welcome everybody. My name's Tracy Cobb, and we're going to talk today with Linda Michaels, HR consulting expert. And we're going to talk a little bit about invisible costs inside of your HR department and payroll in particular, and how it might be affecting your business. And if you've missed our previous ones, we have three previous ones too. I want you to go ahead and take a look at those. I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. We have two more to go after this series is over. So attracting and retaining your employees, company culture and why it really matters, and then leadership, making sure that you're in the driver's seat. So those are our previous three that we did. This is number four, and we've got two more after this that we're going to hit up. And the next one after this, I'll tell you that at the end. I'm not going to tell you now. We'll save it for the end. So really, CFOs and owners often see a lot of turnover. You're hiring people, maybe you've got disengaged employees, but you're not really sure what that financial impact would be, but you know it's affecting your business somehow. So in the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to go over some ways that you can kind of measure that and determine what your real costs are and how to mitigate those effects or lower the cost of that, because those impacts are on your bottom line every single year and every single month. Remember, for a lot of small businesses, the biggest number on your P&L, profit and loss statement, are your people costs and your payroll costs. So it's really important to keep measuring those. And it's easy to take a piece of equipment and depreciate that or amortize an intangible cost over a period of years. People is a lot harder to measure. So we're going to dig into that a little bit and see if we can kind of get some metrics around that. So let's start, with some basics, Linda. For leaders who are kind of swamped with all these dashboards that they get every month, KPIs, and they're trying to measure themselves against industry standards or maybe what they did last year, budgeting numbers. But the title, looking at spreadsheets, let's keep it simple. What are three things that we probably should be measuring every single month or every single quarter for small to mid-sized businesses?
Yeah, so the key is turnover, obviously, because that definitely affects the P&L. The longer the position remains vacant or the number of times it turns over, definitely costs businesses a lot more money.
Yeah.
Second important metric is engagement. How engaged are your employees? What does that look like? Because obviously, the more engagement, the better productivity, the more money in the bank account. And then obviously, the lower engagement would be more absenteeism, low morale, all of those sorts of things. You see lack of participation or collaboration
Yeah.
that affects the engagement. And then the last metric would be your time to fill. How long does it take you to fill that position? Because time is money. And we work super hard to fill positions as quickly as possible for our clients because we know time is money.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, those three. So you got turnover, engagement, and time to fill. Those are the three things to kind of look at. And
Yep.
and I think it's just, you mentioned it just a second ago, being efficient too. If you don't have somebody in the right position because they're filling in for another position they don't belong in because you've got to still get the job done, then it can be really inefficient for them to operate, or they're just overwhelmed, so they're not doing the job very well. It affects their attitude, affects how they're engaging not only with the rest of the team, but potentially your customers too. So it can go back to, in effect, team culture. We talked about that, previously, but I think that's really important too. So let's dig into this whole turnover cost a little bit. So let's do some math because math is fun. That's what I keep, right? Math is fun.
Math is my favorite.
Math is fun. Is favorite. So let's take that number. Let's say that you've got, a manager position, somebody inside of your business, maybe a middle manager. It doesn't have to be the top, just kind of someplace in the middle. They make maybe $85,000 a year. Takes a couple of months. Let's just say 60 days or so to fill that position. And then because this company's not doing things right, they're having to do it three times a year. And I was kind of astonished by that number, three times a year for a manager, but certainly that happens in a lot of industries. So let's work through those numbers and see what that math looks like. What's that going to cost a company to do that? Again, $85,000 a year, about 60 days to fill, maybe happens three times a year.
Yeah, so that's going to be, you're talking probably well over $200,000 in
Wow.
in cost for, the longer that position feels is vacant, then somebody else has to fill in that gap. So it puts a
Yeah.
burden on the team. And then your recruiting efforts between ad placements and things like that, that's a cost. And then the recruiting time it takes and the interview time And then the training time to get them up to speed so they can be productive, probably maybe by the third month of their
Yeah.
employment, only to turn over again.
Yeah, there's some tangible and intangible costs in there to measure too. I mean, direct, right? What's the
Yeah.
direct cost? Because you have the recruiting costs. If you have an outside placement agency going out and finding a person every time, that's going to be between 15, 20,000 bucks, depending on, how long it takes to do that and what kind of an agreement you have in place. Lost productivity, is a big number. It's harder to measure, but certainly that ramp up and ramp down costs, you the transition cost. If you have somebody it takes a couple months for them to get up to speed. Easily cost you $40,000 per person, in order to get there. And then you've got to transition somebody coming in, so you've got some overlapping payroll perhaps, or maybe the person just flat out quits, and then you've got to fill in somebody else in that position. So that could be rough too. So you think the annual cost of doing that somewhere around a couple $100,000, and that's
Yeah.
twice what it, more than twice what it costs to fill that position in the first place. So I would, think about one not doing that. So how can we prevent that? Uh,
Don't do that.
one of them is culture that we talked about, being a good leader and making sure you're investing that person so that way they can be effective in the job. Making sure at the front end that you're spending enough time to get the right candidates. Maybe they just aren't a good fit for you. They're in the wrong seat or they're on the wrong bus. Whichever way you want to say they're in the wrong spot. So making sure that you have a real good beat on who you're supposed to be hiring, who you're not. But certainly if you're turning over that position that many times, boy, that's a lot of money. Or paying a little bit more to get the right person in that position rather than
Yeah.
trying to cheap out. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but you're trying to maximize the value on your income statement. So you're trying to get a bit better bottom line. But if you spend a little bit more money for that position, maybe spend a little bit more time to do some good recruiting, you would certainly save a lot of money. Because if you could change, I mean, that's huge. If you change that up to having somebody move every 3 years instead of three times a year, that's $200,000, right? That you said, and that's three times a year. That's just the cost. That's not what it's costing them while they're in payroll. That's the cost lost. That's
Yeah.
600 grand. And if you could save that and say, hey, really, instead of paying $85,000 for that position, I'm going to pay 85 or 90 or $100,000 plus I'm going to invest in that position. In the long run, you're a lot better off and they're happier employees. Maybe they'll stick around. So,
Well, and then also having a great onboarding experience and program for them.
yeah,
Because if they're floundering,
yeah,
they're not going to be productive, number one. And number two, they're not going to be happy. They don't know the expectations. I see that so many times where the new hire's not set up for success and then they end up getting frustrated and leaving. So
yeah.
it's all
Yeah,
part of
they're
the.
not going to leave good notes for the next guy, right? And they're not going to
Yeah.
stick around to help train the new person. If you've got somebody that was been really in that position a long time and they're pretty happy and they're retiring or they're just, moving or whatever, a lot of times if they're a loyal employee, they'll stick around for a month or more to try to help transition that new person. But if they really hate the job, if you get 2 weeks out of them, you're going to be lucky sometimes. So.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So about a couple $100,000. The second thing you said was, and I think this is an intangible, harder to measure, but we were talking a little bit about engagement as a leading indicator too. How engaged are they in doing the job? Are they putting in a full 8 working, or are they messing around the computer? Are they engaged? How do
Yeah.
you measure that? What is that?
So engagement, I mean, you're going to be able to tell if your employee's committed or not.
Yeah,
I mean, are they excited to come to work every day? Do they participate? Do they constantly raise their hand when their project comes up or whatever? But then also, so that's their motivation, right? And then their emotional connection to the actual work that they do.
yeah,
A lot of people, hopefully, they're in a job that they love. And when you're in a job that you love, then you just want to give and give and give, right? And continue to add value. But on the other hand, when you look at maybe low survey scores or a lot of absenteeism, or you find that an employee is withdrawn or super quiet, or they're not collaborating with, the other team members, that's a huge indicator that there's some sort of engagement issue. And that's where a red flag should be going off and like, what is broken? How can we fix this engagement?
And it might be something that's not going on inside the company. It could be a personal issue that they're dealing with or something too. So how do you track that? How do you measure that ongoing so you know when that red flag goes up? Because if you're the business owner and you've got, a couple hundred employees or 50 employees even, you're not seeing everybody every single day. And so, that's going to be incumbent upon you to set up systems so that way you're still measuring that and still know whether the frontline workers are having trouble or even a manager. How do
Yeah.
you do that?
So through employee surveys, obviously, but
Okay.
then, like net promoter scores, your customer satisfaction scores, if you're in that type of business, maybe the participation in projects or their absenteeism trends.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody who's absent a lot, obviously, that affects the productivity, that
And they
affects the,
haven't been before. So you're measuring what's changed. And
yeah,
if they haven't been there before, if they haven't had a lot of absenteeism, and then all of a sudden they're having it, then they might have an issue and it might be related to something going on inside your
yeah,
team. Or if they're not, but you're still going to have some sort of a baseline for participation. What's changed? What's going on? So maybe measuring it quarterly or monthly, probably quarterly. And then if there's a red flag that a manager can see, they can bring it to your attention. But just making sure those lines of communication are open. And as I've talked to other business owners, or you've heard this before, I like to have an open door policy, right? Open door policy. That's great. I love to have an open door policy. It means people got to come to me if they have a problem. How about if I'm going out and asking, hey, what's going on? Whether it's a manager or the owner of the business, and just kind of getting a gauge for what's happening out there, and you can kind of feel too.
yeah. I mean, knowing, walking around and knowing your employees' names and being seen and asking questions, how's your kids? How's the dog? How's the family? That's all engagement. That's part
Yeah.
of engagement. And the thing that I see on the HR side is like, if you're going to do an employee survey, you better darn well do something with the results,
Yeah.
because that's when an employee is going to be open and honest with you. And then if you just say, whatever, I'm not going to do anything to make things better, they're
Yeah.
not going to participate in the future.
Yeah. It's like having a suggestion box that never gets emptied. I lost the key to that suggestion box.
Yes.
Makes a lot of
Yes.
sense. Anytime you're yeah, asking for feedback and you're not doing anything with it or acknowledging that you even received it or looked at it, probably not a great sign too.
Yep.
Again, it goes back to what we've talked about on this, quite a bit, is that the biggest number in your P&L is that payroll cost for most businesses. So, you may end up spending a lot of time maintaining equipment, making sure it's greased, making sure it works fine, making sure you're paying your IT firm to come in and make sure it doesn't have any viruses on it and that sort of thing. Got to do the same thing with your people, and that's a bigger cost. So it just makes more sense to invest your hard dollars to make sure that that asset that you're buying every single day, every single hour is performing the way you want it to. Let's see. You said the other thing, time to fill, right? That's the time it
Yes.
takes to find somebody. So let's talk about how that can play into this metric too, and how you forecast that.
Yeah, right. So obviously certain positions are going to be much easier to fill than others. So
Yeah,
if you're looking for that needle in the haystack, it's probably going to take you more than 30 days to find that special skill set or whatever it is that you're needing. But then that ties into like how efficient is your recruiting process, and how efficient are your recruiters? And what if you decide that all of a sudden you acquire a company, or you want to grow and add 200 more employees, right? All that takes workforce planning and time and dedication and things like that. And then potential talent shortages in certain areas and allowing for that. And how expensive is that if your particular industry, you can't find the talent you need? Um, so yeah, the time to fill is pretty critical for most companies.
yeah. And I see, people make bad decisions when they are under the gun to try to get somebody hired and that position filled really quickly. Sometimes they'll just take whoever is available, or they just have a pretty shallow pool out there. Like for instance, in the accounting industry, everybody's looking for, we call them unicorns. That person that can do it all, that you're looking for. So I think you got to be a little bit careful about that and keeping, a bench. ahead of time so that we can keep the bench warm. You're talking with potential prospects or potential team members, keeping that pipeline open certainly helps.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about three different metrics today, or three different areas to kind of apply some metrics in there. And I think, in each one of those, we can pull out just a couple of different numbers that we're going to track that'll help us. And if you can put it in a benchmark sort of way, I think that we mentioned, the cost to hire somebody is certainly is expensive, and what is it really costing you every year in lost productivity and lost, in paying these recruiting fees and sort of that sort of thing. And then looking at turnover rates too, finding out, what's that look like for your company. Are there any kind of like benchmarks out there so I know kind of where I sit with those turnover rates, by the way? Is there something that says, hey, my turnover rate's like 2%, so I'm a superstar, and if it's 40%, I not so much.
Yeah. I mean, so if you visualize a stoplight, right? Green, yellow, red.
Okay.
Green would be, turnover would be obviously less than 10% would be in the green. You're doing well. So that
Yeah.
2% would be fantastic. And a lot obviously depends on the industry, right? Like the
Yeah.
fast food business probably has lots of turnover. But then, you should start worrying about it if you're in the 10 to 20% or the yellow. That should catch your attention of like, oh, what's causing this turnover? A lot of the times it's either job expectations aren't set,
Okay.
it's a crappy manager.
Okay.
And that is a red flag of like, you got to dig into the reason why people are leaving. So making sure you do exit interviews, things like that. And then obviously the red would be anything over 20% would be considered red of like, now you really got a problem. Something is happening that causes this turnover. Maybe they don't have their equipment. Maybe like I said, the manager's crappy, or maybe they just, they don't even have a computer. They have a desk and there's no direction and no guidance. And so I've seen a lot of that happen over my career.
Okay. And all that stuff, on our side of it, because we're accountants, we see it impact the bottom line.
Yeah.
It can be very expensive too. So it's not just a metric that says, how are we doing? Great. I'm 20% or I'm 5%. I was 20%. I mean, that's great. But I think, it helps us protect cash flow, helps us protect forecasting too. If you think about accuracy going forward, whether it's budgets or just where we're going to end up at the end of next year, and how does that go? I think it's really important to be able to look back at those numbers. So kind of want to wrap up those three. I think we got them done. Look at the cadence for that. How often you need to look at those measures. Probably, absenteeism is a really easy one to look at. You probably look at that every single week, and see which ones look like they're being kind of crummy out there. And I think having those quarterly check-in meetings with your employees, at least quarterly, maybe monthly. I know we have some ways that we kind of recommend that you have an all-staff meeting, you have department meetings every day, and from that you can pull out information certainly that will help you manage your team a little bit better. So I think that's it. I think run your numbers this week. If you get a chance, start picking out some of the things that we talked about today. Some of them are really easy, and just get started. Just get started measuring that and see kind of where you fall on that spectrum. Remember, next week, I think it's going to be next week, we have future-proofing your workforce. So that's looking forward to your business and kind of where your business is going to be, doing that a little bit of forecasting we talked about, making sure that you have employees that are engaged in that sort of thing. So that's all I have today. That's it. We're going to wrap it up.